Hello and welcome. We'll get started in about a minute. Okay, so we're going to get started. This is being recorded, so people can watch it at a later date as well. So please just know that. Okay, and this is Hot Remedies for Solar Panel Fraud. We're going to talk about legal issues in the solar panel and home improvement industry. We unfortunately see a lot of scams in this area. My name is Natasha Blazer. I'm a staff attorney at Housing and Economic Rights Advocates, or HERA. We're a legal aid nonprofit working across California, and there's some information about the other work that we do at the end of the presentation as well. So this presentation is a part of a collaboration with the SAC Public Law Library. We love working with them, and it's a part of a series. So if you're interested in learning about other areas of law that we work in, there's a lot of other series as well. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box or the chat, and I'll be sure to leave some time at the end to cover people's questions. Um, Even though I am a attorney, I am not your attorney, so this is a disclaimer. What is about to be shared is not legal advice. This doesn't create an attorney-client relationship between you and I. This is for informational purposes only. It's meant to be a resource. If you want specific advice as to your situation, please reach out after, either to us or you can do another law office to try to get some legal advice. So we're going to jump in here, and here are some things that we're going to cover. We are going to cover a lot, so I might not get to every word on every slide. The slides are really meant to be something that you can refer back to in the future, and they will be shared at the end of the presentation. But this is what we're going to cover. So common issues and red flags, right? What we are seeing out there, what is happening with the fraud in these sales. It involves contractors and it involves financing. So understanding your rights, how to do your own research and protect yourself, as well as your rights, your legal rights and options after the fact. A lot of the information I'm sharing also applies to other home improvements, but there will be some specific solar tips and resources throughout as well. So I think what we'll start with is just kind of the big bucket. So there's kind of three big buckets of harm that we see going on in these transactions. They're misrepresentations, right? People are being misled about the costs and benefits of solar or other home improvements, right? Often energy efficient home improvements, right? We're talking about misrepresentations about how much you're going to save, right? Government benefits, things of that nature. We see poor workmanship. That's kind of the second big bucket, where the solar panels or the other home improvement is not functioning. It's not installed completely or correctly. It's not connected to the electrical grid. And yet people are, becoming on the hook financially for these things, even as the work is not up to snuff. The third big bucket is the predatory financing. So in addition to, selling energy efficient home improvements and solar panels, people are selling the financing and the programs to pay for those improvements. And there's been a lot of misrepresentations and fraud in this area. People are getting signed up for loans that they aren't even aware of. People are being told, what the monthly payments, are going to be, and it's not true. And so these are kind of the things that they're separate parts of the transaction, but together you can see how it could be a really bad situation, right? You're not receiving the benefits you were promised, the thing doesn't even work, and now someone's billing you for it. So those are kind of just overviews, and we'll talk a little bit more about each of them as we go in. Okay. So this is a text heavy slide. Um, I'm not going to go over every little thing, right? You can refer back to it. It's also not exhaustive. But we're talking about the red flags, right? The warning signs when you are getting a sales pitch and when to be wary about what's going on. So I'm just going to speak a little bit generally about how these solicitation happen. So someone knocks on your door, or maybe they call you, or maybe they get your attention in Home Depot or something like that. Most often they knock on your door and they are kind of telling you the first thing probably out of their mouths is like, aren't electrical bills so expensive these days that people are having trouble affording them? We're all having trouble affording them. That's often the hook. But the point is that they're selling, right, some sort of home improvement, oftentimes solar panels, sometimes it's an HVAC, sometimes it's a re-roof, sometimes it's a water filter. And they're talking about, all the benefits and all the money you can save from, installing this improvement. When it comes to how you're going to pay for it, that's where things get a little bit vague. Sometimes it's a little unclear. Oftentimes, homeowners are told that it's a part of a government program, that it's going to be free or low cost, that the system is going to pay for itself because you're gonna save so much money that it's like it's paying for itself. Um, and most often, all of this is happening when the person has a tablet in their hand. They have something, some sort of electronic document in their hands that they're going to ask you to sign at some point. And so the red flags, that you should be looking for are if a loan finds you instead of you going out and finding it yourself, right? That's something to be wary of. Usually, when someone's going to go out and get a loan, they're going to compare rates, right? That's what we always encourage our clients to do. And we often see that that's not happening in these situations because someone is kind of showing up and giving a very good sales pitch as to all the benefits that they are offering. Um, a lot of the time there's not really a clear written agreement. Either, it's kind of a bare bones and there aren't really terms involved, or they're just not giving you anything, anything to read. So there's a variety of things kind of to look out for in these situations. And the important thing to understand, I think, is that the person who's selling you, giving you the sales pitch, they get paid when you say yes. And so there's a little bit of a perverse incentive built into the way that these sales work. Right, even if everything else is above board, right, there is that incentive to just get you to sign and to move forward. Um, so when I tell you that homeowners across the state and actually across the country have been signed up for loans that they have no idea even exist, right? They did not even know that a loan was getting taken out in their name. And that is actually extremely common. It's extremely common. And so how is that possible? And it's possible via electronic signature fraud. And so this can take many forms. Sometimes it's just straight forgery, right? Someone is clicking through an electronic document, pretending to be you and signing your name and initials. Sometimes they are presenting you with a tablet or going somewhere on your phone and asking you to sign something or tap. It's usually just a tap. And what they're doing is they're telling you that maybe they just got to check your eligibility for the government program, or they need to check your credit to see, if you're eligible for a loan or for their program, or you're just authorizing them to give you a quote. Something like that, where you're like, okay, yeah, I'll authorize that. And you tap the tablet, all of a sudden, there's a $50,000 loan in your name because, they've fraudulently applied that electronic signature to a different document. Sometimes people know it's a loan, right? They know what they're getting into, but they've been lied to about the monthly payments or the interest rate or the total cost, right? And so, all of those things are electronic signature fraud. It can take different forms, and it is rampant in these door-to-door sales of home improvements and solar panels. And so I'll say this a few times, throughout the presentation, but I say ask for a hard copy. That's what I say. I say ask for a hard copy. There's no reason not to. Say, mail me a hard copy, come back in 2 weeks, and I'll talk to you about it then once I've been able to read the documents. Um, Oftentimes they don't want you to wait, right? They say, no, you got to sign it right now. You're going to lose out on this interest rate. You're going to lose out on this opportunity unless you lock it down right now. And that in itself is a red flag, right? A lot of people who are scammers, they want to rush you. They want to make sure you don't have time to figure out kind of what's going on. That's part of the ploy. So, I always say take a moment, get a hard copy, tell them to come back next week, slow down the process so you can make sure you understand what's going on in these transactions. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is vetting contractors, because there's different players in these transactions. There's someone who's the salesperson, and that salesperson is selling you both on a contractor and some sort of financing. So to vet contractors, I always say talk to friends, family, get references from them, get different estimates from different contractors, right? Don't just take the first person who knocks on your door and offers you something. Look online. You can look at the Better Business Bureau, Yelp, anything that you normally use to look up other things, to see if you can get information about the contractor. And most importantly, check their license. So in California, contractors are licensed by the Contractor State License Board, or the CSLB, and that's who regulates them, and that's how they get their licenses. So you can go onto their website and you can search a contractor by their license or by their name, and you can find information about them to make sure that they're licensed, and it comes with other information too. If you're ever working with a contractor, they should give you their license number, right? It should be on any paperwork they provide you. And if you ask for it and they don't give it to you, then that's a problem. So let's say you have a license number and you look it up at this website. This is about, it's going to look something like this, where it'll have the contractor's information, their address, their phone number. It'll tell you, if it's expired. It'll also tell you what they're licensed to do, what kind of work they're licensed to do, and it will provide insurance information, and there'll be a complaint disclosure. So if other consumers have complained about this contractor and the CSLB has taken action on those complaints, then there'll be a record of it often. And so I always say, go double check, see if there's any complaints filed against the contractor, and just check them out. The salesperson is also supposed to be independently licensed, okay? So it's always better to be careful and check people's licenses before you contract with them. So some specifically contractor issues that we see come up. Some of it we've already kind of referred to, so I'll go quickly, but substandard work, right? Issues with the work itself, either not happening or not happening completely or correctly. There are a lot of people across California with solar panels on their roofs that don't work, that are not connected to the grid, that they're not benefiting from. And so that is one really big issue that we see in the solar context specifically, but it can be anything, right? They didn't do the roof properly, the HVAC isn't, done properly, what have you. Like I said, there are license issues, right? People not, properly staying licensed or employing licensed folks. And then there's a whole set of contract issues, right? You're entitled to a complete contract with all the required terms and all the information. A lot of times we see people misrepresenting the price of the work or the financing terms. Sometimes they're demanding or accepting payment before the job is complete. And so there's kind of a variety of issues that people run into. And so when this happens, let's say you get into a dispute with a contractor, We always advise to keep a clear line of communication and document issues. So a lot of things happen over the phone, right? Maybe you're complaining over the phone, but emails, texts, letters, photos of the work. Even if things are going well, it's good to keep documentation of a transaction. And if there are issues, we always encourage people to write it down, give it to the contractor in writing, either email or a letter. Let them know that you have these concerns. Many of them will try to address them at that point, right? It's always good to have, concrete concerns like that. Um, if that doesn't work, right, if there's still issues moving forward, then we're going to talk a little bit about some of your options. One of them is obviously talking to a legal professional, either legal aid or a private attorney. But a lot of people want to try to resolve these disputes on their own. And so I'm going to talk to you about filing a complaint and also submitting a bond claim, which is like a claim on the contractor's insurance. So filing a CSLB complaint. So like I said, this is the Contractor State License Board. This is the regulatory agency that regulates contractors in California. If you have a dispute or you're having an issue with a contractor, you think that they're violating the law, you can file a complaint. And you can do this by mail or online. You have to do it within 4 years. And once you do it, they'll confirm receipt, they'll give you a complaint number. Someone will usually talk to you about what's going on, try to maybe mediate the dispute between you and the contractor. If the issues require further investigation, an investigator will be assigned. And so in that case, they might be asking for copies of documents, photos or contracts, and interviewing you to try to figure out what's going on. I will say that the process can often take time. The CSLB has a lot of complaints that they're dealing with at any given time, so try to be patient. And it's really a tool for when the contractor has just stopped, communicating or is really refusing to address the concerns that you're bringing up. I will say that there's no, guarantee of a specific outcome. So, if the CSLB investigates, they can sometimes cite the contractor, right? They can suspend their license if it's, if they think that that's warranted. They could be, they could demand that they reimburse you. Sometimes they'll refer you to other dispute resolution programs, and sometimes they will tell you to take it up in civil court and they'll close the complaint. So there's a variety of different things of ways that it can go. So just keep that in mind. And even if the person is unlicensed, the CSLB has less jurisdiction over unlicensed contractors, but it's always good to still document it, file a complaint if they're violating your rights. So the last contractor specific thing that I will mention is a bond claim, and I'm happy to talk to people more about this if they are, trying to submit one. Basically, in California, in order to have a contractor's license, you have to have a surety bond. And that bond is meant to protect homeowners or other businesses if the contractor's misconduct, results in financial losses for them. So the information will again be on the Contractor State License Board website. You can look up the contractor, just like I said, and see all that information. Their bond information will be there as well. You can see the bond history. It's usually renewed with the license every 2 years. And so you can click on the, insurance company and you can call them, ask how to submit a claim. Sometimes it's a letter, sometimes it's an email, it can sometimes be a specific form. So the first thing that I usually do is I call the bond company to see what the best way to submit it is. One of the most important things to understand about these are that the bond is a total of $25,000 every 2 years. And that is important because it's $25,000 total, right? And so that means that anybody who was harmed by that contractor in those 2 years are going to be making a claim on that same 25,000. So I've had clients who submit a bond claim and there's nothing left for them, right? Or there's something left for them, but it's not enough to make them whole. So it's just something to consider when you're thinking about your different options. The time limit has to do with the license period where the work was complete. It's basically 2 years after the end of that license period. I think practically speaking, the takeaway is just to submit a bond claim as soon as something happens, right? Do it as soon as possible. That's your best chance at, not running out of the time limit, but also not, getting a chance to get some of the bond that's available. I would advise you to provide documentation, right? This is also why you want to document things that are happening, right? Any projects on the home, because the bond company is going to ask for them, right? How were you financially harmed, right? Are there receipts? Are there estimates from other contractors who are going to come in and fix the work? What exactly is that situation? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about solar specifically for a couple slides, just to help people understand, if you have one or if you're thinking about it, because the process of reading your electrical bill gets a little complicated. So there's kind of two ways to be able to tell what your panels are producing, right? Let's say they get installed, they get connected to the grid. That's a whole process with the utility. How can you tell that they're working? It's going to show up on your electrical bill. So that's one way. The other way is that usually solar panel manufacturers or some companies will offer monitoring websites or apps. So that's another way that you can tell kind of what's going on with the panels. Particularly if you also have a battery, since that won't be captured in your electrical bill every month. So there's two ways of crediting. I'm not going to get into the details of it. So if it was before 2023, we provide you links on how to read your solar bill. If it was after April 2023, they basically are crediting at different rates. The main takeaways I would say are pay attention to how much electricity you're actually producing. They'll have the kilowatt hours on there. They'll have information about, how much electricity you're using versus how much you're producing, right? And so practically speaking, that the bottom line is how much you are on the hook for to pay. And and it's different based on the different plans. I don't want to overcomplicate things, but for the ones before April 2023, one issue that has come up is that the utility companies will sometimes basically they will kind of monitor how much you're producing and how much you're using over a 12-month period, and then they'll only charge you after that 12-month period. That's called a true up statement. And that's important to know, because we have had clients where, it's a year after they've gone solar, right? All of their electrical bills have been very low, right? Everything was going according to plan. And then all of a sudden they get a bill for a few $1,000s, because they actually haven't been getting billed on a monthly basis. So if for people who have been hooked up to the grid more recently, they've kind of done away with that because there have been so many issues. But in general, you want to be looking carefully at your bill, and understanding month to month what the charges are, even if they're not becoming due at that month. So I'm happy to, talk to anyone else about this. There are a lot of different people who can help you understand your bill, particularly also at the utility companies. Like I said, they have guides, which are linked on the slides, to help people understand this. I think that when it comes to scams, the the scammers don't want you to understand how the system works, right? That's how they get away with it. And so anything that we can do to help you, understand is on us. There's another resource I want to tell you about, and that is the Solar Consumer Protection Guide. So this is a packet put out by the CPUC, which is the California entity that regulates the utilities. And it basically goes over the pros and cons of solar, right? What it means to go solar, the process and the timelines, the financing options, which I'm going to talk about in a moment here. It goes over questions that helpful questions to ask the contractor, to ask the salesperson, to be thinking about as you are considering going solar. So it's a very helpful document, and it's available in a lot of different languages. We always recommend that people, take a look at it. Importantly, most people in California, it's actually required for the solar contractor to give you this before they have you sign any contract. And they're supposed to offer it to you in hard copy. And, we see that happening almost none of the time. So if you're ever handed a stack of documents, or rather, you probably emailed them, and they're asking you to click through and just initial here, initial here, initial here, what they're probably doing is not allowing you to review this very helpful packet of information that they're required to give you, right? It exists to try to prevent fraud, which is why, a lot of times they're kind of skipping through it. So take a look. It has a lot of the information that I'm providing today, and it's available online. So I think so now I'm going to move into the financing. So solar panels are expensive, right? How are people getting solar panels on their roofs all the time? Particularly low to moderate income folks, right? What is being offered to them to make that possible? And unfortunately, what we see is that, in addition to sometimes, workmanship issues with the solar panels themselves, we see a lot of misrepresentations happening with respect to the contract that is financing, or monetarily allowing those solar panels to get installed. So there's three big kinds of contracts that I'm going to talk about. The first one is loans, and that really comes into play with other home improvements too. So oftentimes, they're bundling roof work with the solar. Sometimes, it's an HVAC as well or other things. A lot of our work also doesn't even include solar, right? So I've had folks come in with predatory loans just to, that basically financed a bad paint job, right? That's what we're talking about. These loans are used for all sorts of things. The second two options, leases and power purchase agreements, those are pretty solar specific. You're not going to see that with other home improvements as much. So we're going to jump into each of these and kind of misrepresentations and practices that we're seeing with them. So there's two kinds of loans. I'm going to talk about them generally first. So one, if it's a loan, that means that the plan is for you to own the panels, right? You're taking a loan out to own the panels, and that's where certain government and tax incentives come into play. I am not going over the tax credit or the tax benefits of going solar in this presentation. I'm not a tax attorney. It's very much based on your individual situation and when things were installed. But I will say that the tax implications of going solar is one of the most common misrepresentations that we see in our work. It is often a hook where people are making false claims about how much money you're going to get back, how much you're going to save on your taxes, right? Tax credit, tax refund, tax rebate, and other government incentives. It's often a very central part of the pitch to have someone go solar. So just be mindful of that. We always say, talk to your, tax guy, right? If you have a tax preparer, there are also low and no cost, tax resources in California. Talk to someone who doesn't have a stake in you saying yes to the contract, right? So you can get real information about the benefits or costs to you in that way. So the two main kinds of loans, the first one is unsecured, and this is a lot of what we see. And it's called unsecured because It's not borrowed against the house. So it's not like a mortgage where if you get behind, they can force a foreclosure to sell the home. It's unsecured, meaning that's not possible. However, they often will record a UCC financing statement on the property. And so what that is, it is a statement that is recorded in the county property records as well as the state records. And so if someone's searching for your property, that comes up. And it's not a security interest in your home, it's a security interest in the improvement, right? And so what they're saying is with this UCC lien, they are, essentially securing the solar panels. We've seen this a lot, and why they do this is because even though they can't foreclose, when you go to refinance or when you go to sell, that needs to be paid off, right? And that's how they get paid. So even though it's unsecured, it's still affecting your equity. And so that's just something to really be aware of. Most people I know, who have taken out these loans either on purpose or via fraud, do not know that that's going to be recorded. It's usually supposed to be for like a fixture, like a solar panel, right? But I've seen it again, HVACs, bad paint jobs. We've seen the UCC liens recorded for them. So those are some big things to kind of be aware of with the unsecured loans. I also would just pay attention to entry rates. So a lot of times they're pitching a really low monthly payment or a really low interest rate, and oftentimes they are selling something that maybe is just an introductory rate or just for the first 12 months or something like that. And so a lot of times we have consumers who are only realizing they got scammed like 12 or 18 months into the contracts when all of a sudden the payment terms change in a way that they weren't told. So something to be aware of. The second, substantial loan scam that I want you to be aware of is called property assessed clean energy loans. And this is secured by a super priority tax lien on the property. The reason why it's a tax lien is because you pay it through your property taxes. And if you're a homeowner, right, you know that this has substantial implications, right, for the security of your home. So for most people, if the property taxes go up, that means that their mortgage goes up because the escrow goes through the roof, right? So all of a sudden you can't afford your mortgage payments. And the issue with this, right, is that it has such a high foreclosure risk when the sales pitch and the electronic signature fraud and the workmanship issues, all of those are still at play, right? So sometimes we're talking about people facing foreclosure for solar panels that don't work, right, on a loan that they weren't even told existed. These are the things that we are unfortunately seeing in this field. And so it's just something to be very aware of. It's often sold as a government program because it's associated with the property taxes, right? They'll sometimes say that, it's a free government program or a government program specifically for low income folks. If anybody is trying to sell you on an energy efficient improvement and they mention property taxes, that in itself should just be a red flag. I would just stop, wait a second, talk to your family, talk to a housing counselor, talk to legal aid to make sure that you are protecting yourself and understanding your rights. So that is solar loans. It applies to things that are not just solar, right? We're seeing this home improvements kind of across the board. The next two pieces are going to be solar specific. One of them is leases. And so both with leases and power purchase agreements, these are the second two ways that people often get solar on their homes, but they're not purchasing the panels. And that can often be a misrepresentation in that process, right? I've had people with leases who think they own the panels. I've had people with loans who think that they're leasing, right? And so that's where that vagueness on the financing can really be harmful. So when you're leasing, right, another company owns them, they install them. and you are, paying regular payments just like you would if you're renting an apartment, and you're getting to benefit from the energy production from the solar panels. So the idea is that even though you are now paying your electrical bill and on a lease, you're saving so much on your electrical bill that it's worth it. And we often do not see that that is the case. So we often have people who end up being in a worse position because they're paying two bills. But that's the idea, right? That is the theory behind it, a way for people to benefit without having to take out a loan. And so one of the main ways that they'll also kind of hook you is they'll say that at the end of the lease, you'll own the panels. And usually that's not true. Usually at the end of the lease, you get an option to buy, for that's pretty expensive, right? You still have to pay for them. And by that point, the panels have deteriorated. So that's kind of one way where they'll offer for you to own them at the end when that's not really true. So that's a common misrepresentation we see. I will also just say that all of these, something to keep in mind for solar specific, um, solar panels deteriorate over time. So over a few years, they're going to work, they're going to produce less energy. And then over a few more years, they're going to produce less energy, right? So when you are considering what you're going to pay over the next 10, 15, 20 years, that should be coming into the calculus. And oftentimes in the sales pitch, that is not addressed. So again, something to keep in mind. Um, so the last one is similar but a little different, and it's a power purchase agreement. And this is one where, like, again, another company owns the panels. They install them, right? They're not yours. But you're not leasing them. Instead, you are buying the energy produced from that company. So they're selling you back what the solar panels are producing, at often a fixed price rate. So it's not a fixed monthly payment, right? Because it's based on your usage. But it usually is, they usually set the price rates at in the original contract. And you can see that the rates usually escalate. So over time, the rates are going to go up for what you're paying per, kilowatt for that energy produced by the solar system. That's something to, again, be wary of, because even if it's worth it for the first few years, oftentimes at some point it becomes less worth it. So this is why really reading the contracts at the beginning, doing the math, thinking about what is best for you financially is so important, because when someone gets you to quickly just initial and sign, right, and kind of speed you through the process, going solar is going to benefit you, right, financially. A lot of times, in order to figure out if it's actually going to financially benefit you, you have to dig in a little bit, and ask some more questions and look at the contracts, because this is how people end up with, unfortunately, going solar, but actually becoming less financially secure, which is, of course, never the goal. So here are some best practices, particularly with regard to, the financing where you're usually agreeing to some sort of contract that's going to last for decades, right? And most homeowners, if they were doing that, would, they'd sit down, they really dig into it, just like when you're signing a mortgage, right? A 30-year mortgage. And instead, someone's convincing you to just tap a tablet, right? Without thinking that this is going to be a long obligation. So best practices: ask questions, ask so many questions, be that annoying customer that thinks of every detail, right? What are my monthly payments going to be now? What are they going to be like in 5 years? Who am I paying? What happens, if something goes wrong with the solar panels? What happens, if X, Y, and Z? And so there's all sorts of questions that you can be asking. And it's always important to take a pause, right? Because if you're asking about the costs, right, if you start asking about what's the price, what's the monthly payment, what's the interest rate, and they're just talking about how much you're going to save on electricity, right, that's a little bit of a red flag, right? You want to know what you're obligated for, not just what they're pitching you as what's going to be your financial benefit. I know I'm repeating myself, but get a copy you can read and read all of it, right? Get a copy you can read. For a lot of folks, that means asking for a hard copy. You are entitled to a hard copy. Have them send it to you. If they don't want to, then you can find somebody else to work with. Do not sign, tap, or agree to anything on the same day as a sales pitch. Say thanks for the offer, come back in a couple weeks, I'll think about it. And if they want you to sign or tap anything right then again, beware, you can work with someone else who's going to allow you to actually consider your options. And look into your other options, right? Get bids, check out alternative financing, your credit union, your local bank, other programs. It's always good to see what's out there. Some basic rights that that everyone should really know. You are entitled to all agreements in the language that the salesperson spoke to you. So if you are chatting with the salesperson in Spanish, you are entitled to all those agreements to be in Spanish. That's something that a lot of people don't realize. For solar specifically, you are entitled to a solar disclosure document, which lists the total costs, including financing, of the solar panel system that you are agreeing to. For most California, utility customers, you're entitled to the Solar Consumer Protection Guide. A lot of them don't give it. I would suggest finding it yourself and giving it a read through if you're considering going solar. And then you're also, you're entitled to specific notice rights of your notice of your right to cancel, right? You have more time to cancel if you're a senior. And so, I mean, and these are just a few of your many rights and the consumer protections in place to try to protect folks. So if you think that anything has been violated, right, seek out legal counsel, talk to legal aid, contact us, and we can try to figure out what's going on. For financing or payment disputes, so for contractors, right, it's the Contractor State License Board. For lenders in California, it's the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation most of the time. It depends a little bit on the lender, but this is a California agency that does licenses and regulates most lenders. So you can look them up, right, by name, just like you can with contractors, and you can file a complaint. The DFPI may not investigate every complaint, but we always say file it, make sure that they know what's going on. If the lender's doing it to you, they're probably doing it to somebody else. And it's a good idea to submit. It also creates documentation, right? You can show the dispute, have a record of it, which can be very important. The federal equivalent is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Again, they might not take action right now on your complaint, but it's important to keep a record, and it's important to also, put people on notice that that is what this lender is doing and the kind of conduct that they're engaging in. So for those reasons, we always say, if you're going to complain to the DFPI, complain to the CFPB as well. Consider other financing options, right? If you really want solar, or if you really need something on the house, right? It's not like you need a roof and you can't pay for it. I think the main takeaway I want you to have is to think about your options, right? Compare multiple different ways that you could finance it. We never tell people to further encumber their home if they're not absolutely required to, but this slide is more to show there's a bunch of different options, right? There's everything we talked about earlier. There's all of these. There's also some local programs that I'm going to point out, but just like with anything else, you want to compare the rates. You want to see what works best with your situation, right? It depends on where you are, how you're paying, right? The state of the property, your age, your financial situation. And so I really encourage people to compare different options before tapping or clicking anything, and also reaching out to a housing counseling agency, right, who can help you through this. HUD, housing counselor agencies, you can easily find online, and a lot of times they can kind of walk you through your options. Before you do anything with financing, you might want to check with your utility. So there's a couple different programs available. This solar programs for disadvantaged communities, these I want to preface are very narrow. So it's based on pollution and census tract. So most people, are not going to fall into these categories, but they do exist. And so I always say you can always talk to your utility, see if you, qualify. In general, though, I will say what I've said this whole time, and that is that people saying that there's a free government program, right, for that you will benefit from for solar or other energy efficient home improvements, is a really common misconception and a misrepresentation. So always check it, right? Get documentation. You want to see exactly what the benefit is. Someone just telling you about it isn't enough. There's also some just general home repair assistance that are low or no cost. These are more for, usually lower, less substantial home repairs, but they are out there. And we always say double check those, double check with local nonprofits, before you even start thinking about taking out financing or creating a financial obligation for yourself. It's always better to be safe. And so you can check with programs, around you. You can always ask us as well. Other things to consider, right? Energy discounts. In California, we have a couple different discount programs, right? For low-income folks and families. Medical baseline is for when you rely on a device that uses electricity to survive for your health. And we have a lot of clients who would have saved more money getting on the care discount than they saved going solar, unfortunately. So we really want to, highlight these, always check and make sure that if you can get any relief, right, other than obligating yourself to some sort of financing. So I will pause there for any questions. I went super fast. I'm proud of myself. Let's see. Here is some other areas that we work in. So debt collection, credit reporting. We do work on mortgage and foreclosure issues, tenant rights, estate planning, other things. So we're happy to talk to you if you're having any issues in those arenas, to see how we can help, or refer you to people who are better suited for it. And then I think the last side are just, our resources, as well as the law library resources. SAC Law Library is an excellent, excellent resource for people to be aware of. Let's see. Oh, okay, I see your question. When a solar lease expires, is there a preferred approach for dealing with the end of the lease? I think that would depend on the specific lease, right? Each contract can be a little bit different. And so sometimes, when you come to the end of the lease, there are certain obligations, either on you or the company who is leasing it to you. There's also certain kind of terms that can be triggered, like let's say if you sell the house, right, and move out, and kind of what happens to the lease at that point. So I don't think there's necessarily a preferred approach in general. I think it would kind of depend on the contract terms as well as your goals, right? And what you're trying to get out of it. You're welcome to reach out. We're happy if you have a solar lease, we're happy to look at it with you. but I can't probably offer any more specific advice than that without seeing it. You're welcome. Thanks for joining.